It's 40 degrees below zero. The wind hasn't stopped for 6 hours, and somewhere in the middle of nowhere, a man is standing next to a steel trailer, watching smoke curl out of a chimney pipe, knowing that if his build fails tonight, he has nowhere else to go. This isn't a tiny house tour. This is a story about a man who looked at a 30-year mortgage, did the math, and decided the bank was never going to win. He didn't have 6 figures. He didn't have a construction crew. He had $8,000, a stretch of frozen land, and a stubborn refusal to spend the next 3 decades paying interest on a house he'd never fully owned until he was old enough to forget why he wanted it in the first place. Here's the number that started it all, and it should genuinely stop you cold. The average homeowner with a 30-year mortgage pays back double what the house is actually worth. Buy a house for $200,000, and by the time the bank is done with you, you've handed over $400,000 or more. That's not a guess. That's how amortization works. The first 15 years of your payments mostly cover interest, not the house itself. You're renting the bank's money for half your adult life. He didn't want to be a statistic in that story. So he built something else entirely. A home shaped like an arched steel tunnel, sitting on a triple-axle trailer, parked in the snow with smoke rising from a wood stove. Total cost, $8,000. No mortgage, no bank, no 30-year leash. While other men were signing 30-year contracts without a second thought, he was out in the cold, bolting steel panels into place, betting everything on a structure most people would never even consider calling a home. But here's the part nobody tells you when they show you the finished product glowing warm in the snow. There was one mistake early in this build that almost ended the whole project before winter even hit. We'll get to that, because the real lesson in this story isn't the price tag. It's what almost went wrong, and how close he came to losing everything he'd put into it. Most people who think about leaving the mortgage system behind never actually do it, because the first question that stops them is always the same one. Where do you even start? Land costs money. Materials cost money. Permits cost money. And the moment you start adding it all up in your head, the whole idea feels impossible before you've laid a single board. He ran into that exact wall. The difference is, he didn't stop there. He started looking at structures other than the standard 4 walls and a peaked roof, because the standard shape is the expensive part. Change the shape, and the entire cost structure underneath it changes too. Let's start with the bones of this thing, because the structure is the whole reason this build was even possible on this budget. A Quonset, for anyone who hasn't run into the word before, is an arched steel structure. Picture a tube cut in half lengthwise and dropped onto the ground. No trusses, no complicated roof framing, no engineer-stamped blueprints for a roof system that has to fight gravity and snow load every single winter. The arch does that work on its own. Snow doesn't pile up and crush it. It slides off the curve. Wind doesn't catch flat walls and tear at them. It glides around the shape instead of fighting it. That single design choice is what made the $8,000 number possible. A stick-built tiny house with the same square footage easily runs 3 to 5 times that, sometimes more, once you account for lumber, roofing, trusses, and the labor to frame all of it. The arch steel skipped almost all of that. He bought the steel panels, bent the shape, and bolted them onto a simple frame. Days of labor that would normally take weeks. Underneath it all sits the foundation, and this is where most people watching this video are going to lean in, because this is the part that sounds almost too good to be true. There is no foundation, not in the traditional sense. The entire structure sits on a flatbed trailer with 3 axles underneath it. Why does that matter? Because in most places, the moment you pour foundation and bolt a structure to ground, you've triggered a long list of obligations. Permits, inspections, property taxes calculated off the value of a permanent structure, zoning restrictions that can take months to clear, sometimes longer, sometimes never. Put that same structure on wheels, and in a lot of jurisdictions, you're suddenly dealing with vehicle registration instead of building code. That's not a loophole he invented. That's just how a lot of tiny house builders have been quietly sidestepping the system for years. He just took it further than most. But mobility isn't just about avoiding paperwork. It's about control. If the land he's on stops working for him, if the view turns into a problem, if he wants to chase warmer weather for a season, he hooks up a truck and leaves. Try doing that with a basement and a poured slab. Think about what that actually means in practical terms. A traditional homeowner who picks the wrong piece of land is stuck with that decision for as long as they hold the mortgage. Bad soil, a noisy neighbor, a flood zone that wasn't obvious until the first spring melt. None of that matters once a foundation is poured and the bank has its lien on the property. He doesn't carry that risk. If a piece of land turns out to be wrong, the cost of being wrong is the price of a toe, not the price of starting over from zero. Now here's where numbers actually start to add up piece by piece, because this is the part that turns a nice story into something you can actually use. The trailer itself, used, triple axle, rated to carry serious weight, ran a few $1,000s. That's the most expensive single component in the entire build, and it's also the most durable. A good trailer outlasts almost anything you put on top of it. The arched steel panels came next. Pre-curved steel sheeting, bought in bulk, bolted into an overlapping pattern that sheds water and snow without a single seam failing. This is where the Rayall savings showed up, because steel doesn't need the same finishing work that wood framing demands. No sheathing, no felt paper, no shingles, nailed one row at a time in freezing temperatures, with fingers going numb, just panel after panel, locked together, done. Then came insulation, because steel without insulation is a refrigerator in winter and an oven in summer. He packed a cavity between the steel skin and the interior with lining with rigid foam board, the kind that doesn't sag, doesn't absorb moisture, and holds its R value for decades. This single decision is the difference between a wood stove that barely keeps the place above freezing and a wood stove that turns inside into a place you'd actually want to live. Most first-time builders underestimate this step, and it's the single biggest reason cheap builds fail in real winters. Spray foam costs more, but seals every gap. Bad insulation is cheaper, but shifts over time inside a curved structure, leaving cold spots that no amount of stove heat can fix. He chose rigid board specifically because it holds its shape against the curve of the steel without slumping, and because it doesn't pull moisture out of the air the way some other materials do in a space that's heated by an open flame every single day. The wood cladding on the front face, the part you see in every photo of this build, the windows glowing orange like a lantern in the snow. That wasn't just for looks. Wood siding on the front gives a thermal break in the one spot most exposed to direct weather, and it gives a whole structure a softness that pure steel never could. It's the difference between a home and a storage container. Windows came next, carefully placed, not just for light, but for heat. South-facing glass on a clear winter day pulls in more free heat than people expect. Passive solar gain isn't a luxury feature. It's free energy, sitting there every single sunny day, doing work the wood stove doesn't have to do. That placement was an accident, and it wasn't guesswork either. Every window on the south-facing side does double duty, pulling in sunlight during the short daylight hours of deep winter, while the smaller windows on the shaded side stay minimal, just enough for light and air without bleeding heat back out into the cold. On a clear day, that sunlight alone can carry the inside temperature for hours without the stove burning a single extra log. On a cloudy day, none of that matters, and the stove has to do all the work alone. That's the kind of detail a stick-built house rarely bothers to think through, because a stick-built house usually has the budget to just throw more insulation and more heating capacity at the problem, instead of designing around the sun. And then, the heart of the whole operation, the wood stove and the chimney running up through the curved roof. This is the most dangerous part of the entire build, and it's also the part most videos skip past too fast. A chimney piped through a steel and wood structure needs proper clearance from anything combustible, a certified collar where it passes the roof, and a cap that keeps embers from drifting back down. Get this wrong, and you don't have a cozy cabin. You have a structure fire waiting for the first really cold night when the stove gets pushed hard. That brings us back to the mistake, the one that almost ended this whole project. When the chimney went in, the first clearance measurement was wrong. Not by a mile, by inches. But inches matter when you're talking about wood framing sitting next to a pipe that can hit 400 degrees on the outside during a hard burn. It wasn't caught during the build. It was caught afterward, during a routine check before the first real cold snap of the season, when a hand pressed against the wall near the chimney came back warmer than it should have, warmer than safe. That's the moment to stop being a feel-good story about beating the bank and became a story about how close, cheap, and dangerous can sit next to each other if you're not paying attention. The fix meant pulling the wood cladding back, adding proper clearance, resealing, and losing several days right as the temperature outside was dropping fast. Every hour spent fixing it was an hour the cold kept closing in. That's the real cost nobody puts on the price tag. Time, when you're racing weather, is worth more than money. It got fixed. Properly, this time. Tested, checked, and checked again before the first real fire of the season. That detail matters more than almost anything else in this video, because $8,000 only means something if the structure built with it doesn't burn down or freeze you out the first hard winter it faces. Now, let's talk about what living in this thing actually costs, because the sticker price up front is only half the story. And this is the part most bills like this conveniently leave out. Heating with what means time and labor every single day. Cutting it, splitting it, stacking it, feeding the stove every few hours through the night if it's cold enough. That's not free. It's a different kind of payment than a mortgage, but it's still a payment, made in sweat instead of dollars. Some nights. That means waking up at 2 in the morning to feed the fire, because if it goes out at 40 below, you're not just cold. You're in danger. A full season of heat means a serious stockpile of split wood, cut and seasoned months ahead of time, because greenwood doesn't burn clean and doesn't burn hot enough when the temperature really drops. That means planning in spring for a winter that's still months away. It means a chainsaw that has to stay maintained, an axe that has to stay sharp, and hours of physical labor stacked up before the first snowfall even arrives. None of that shows up in an $8,000 price tag. But all of it is part of the real cost of living this way. Water and power, if he's running off-grid, come with their own quiet costs. A small solar setup with battery storage handles basic electricity, lighting, charging devices, maybe a small pump, but it has limits. Cloudy stretches in winter, when the sun barely clears the horizon for a few hours, mean rationing power instead of using it freely. Water, if it's not tied into a municipal line, means hauling it, storing it, and making sure it doesn't freeze solid in the lines overnight. And here's the part that's almost never said out loud in videos like this. Insurance companies don't love structures on trailers. Financing, if you ever wanted to upgrade or expand, is hard to get on something that doesn't fit neatly into the category of house or RV. Resale value is a question mark, because the market for a hand-built arch steel home on wheels is small. If you ever want to sell it, he's not selling to the same buyer pool as a normal house. He's selling to someone who wants exactly what he built, and that buyer might take a while to find. This is a trade-off that gets glossed over in almost every video like this one, and it deserves to be said plainly instead of buried. A bank will hand out a 30-year mortgage on a standard house without blinking, because that house fits a category they understand and can resell if things go wrong. A structure like this one fits no category cleanly. That means no easy refinancing if he ever needs cash. That means convincing an insurance underwriter, one conversation at a time, that this isn't a liability waiting to happen. None of that is impossible. It's just slower, and it takes more effort than signing standard paperwork at a bank branch. Zoning, depending on where the trailer sits, can also turn from a clever workaround into a real headache if local rules tighten or a property owner changes their mind about letting it stay parked. Mobility cuts both ways. It's freedom until the day you actually need to move it in a hurry, in winter, on icy roads, with everything inside it not built for highway speeds. There's also the question of permanence, and what it actually means to put down roots in something that's designed to leave at a moment's notice. A traditional homeowner plants a garden expecting to watch it grow for decades. He doesn't get that same luxury, not in the same way. Every choice he makes about this piece of land is made knowing it could change. That's not necessarily a loss. For some men, that's the entire appeal. But it's worth saying clearly, because freedom from a mortgage isn't the same thing as freedom from every kind of constraint. It's a trade, not a magic trick. None of that erases what he built. It just means the freedom isn't free. It's traded. Bank payments for 30 years, traded for daily labor, constant weather awareness, and a level of self-reliance most people have never had to develop because the system always handled it for them. So here's the comparison, laid out plainly, because this is the part worth sitting with. A 30-year mortgage on an average home, hundreds of thousands of dollars in total payments, most of the interest locked to one location, owned by the bank until the very last payment clears. Property taxes every single year, regardless of income, regardless of hardship. Insurance requirements set by the lender, not by him. A home he can't sell without the bank's approval until the debt is gone. An $8,000 Quonset on a trailer, paid in full from day one. No interest, no bank holding the title hostage. Mobile, meaning if the land stops working, the home doesn't have to stay behind. In a lot of areas, lower or no property tax, because it's registered as a vehicle, not real estate. The trade-off is daily physical labor, weather risk that never fully goes away, and a bill that has to be done right the first time, or the second time, like the chimney clearance that almost wasn't caught in time. Picture the two paths side by side, 30 years apart. The man with the mortgage is, on paper, still working to pay off a debt that was signed before some of his own choices about his life were even made. The man in the Quonset finished paying for his home the same week he finished building it. One of them is still calculating how many years of payments remain. The other one stopped counting years ago because there was nothing left to count. This isn't a story telling you to abandon your mortgage tomorrow and go build a steel tube in the snow. It's a story showing you what's actually possible when someone refuses to accept that the only path to owning a home is 30 years of debt. The math on a traditional mortgage isn't wrong. It's just one option. This is proof there's another one, built with steel, wood, a trailer, and a willingness to fix the mistakes that show up along the way instead of pretending they didn't happen. Right now, somewhere out past the tree line, smoke is still rising from that chimney pipe, properly cleared this time, into air cold enough to freeze exposed skin in minutes. Inside, it's warm. Inside, there's no mortgage statement waiting in the mail. Inside, every dollar spent on that build is already paid off, sitting there working for him instead of against him. That's the whole point, not the price tag. The ownership, the fact that nothing about that structure belongs to anyone but him, starting the moment the last panel got bolted into place. No bank letter arriving every month with a balance still owed. No 30-year calendar counting down in the background of every major decision he makes. Just a steel arch, a wood stove, and a piece of land that, for now, is exactly where he wants to be. That's not nothing. For a lot of men watching this, that's everything they've been trying to figure out how to get for years, without ever finding a path that didn't run straight through a bank's front door. Let me know in the comments if you found this helpful. And subscribe for more videos about how to survive cold winters.